Sing me a song of a lass that is gone. Say could that lass be I? Mary of soul, she sailed on a day over the sea to sky. Billow and breeze, islands and seas, mountains of rain and sun. All that was good, all that was fair, all that was me is gone. Sing me a song of a lass that is gone. Say, could that lass be I? Mary of soul, she sailed on a...
WallByrd Theater presents a call-time production of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Chapter 11, Who Stole the Tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts were seated on their throne when they arrived, with a great crowd assembled about them, all sorts of little birds and beasts, as well as the whole pack of cards. The Knave was standing before them in chains, with a soldier on each side to guard him. And near the king was the White Rabbit, with the trumpet in one hand and a scroll of parchment in the other. In the very middle of the court was a table, with a large dish of tarts upon it. They looked so good that it made Alice quite hungry to look at them.
I wish they'd get the trials on and hand around the refreshments,
Alice thought, but there seemed to be no chance of this, so she began looking at everything about her to pass away the time. Alice had never been in a court of justice before, but she had read about them in books, and she was quite pleased to find that she knew the name of nearly everything there.
That's the judge,
She said to herself.
because of his great wig.
The judge, by the way, was the king. And as he wore his crown over the wig, he did not look at all comfortable, and it was certainly not becoming.
And that's the jury box, and those creatures.
She was obliged to say creatures, you see, because some of them were animals and others were birds.
I suppose they are the jurors.
She said this last word 2 or 3 times over to herself, being rather proud of it, for she thought, me too, that very few little girls of her age knew the meaning of it all. However, jurymen would have done just as well. The jurors were all writing very busily on their slates.
What are they doing?
Alice whispered to the Gryphon.
They can't have anything to put down yet before the trial's begun.
They're putting down their names for fear they should forget them before the end of the trial.
Stupid things.
Alice began in a loud, indignant voice, but she stopped hastily, for the White Rabbit cried out,
"Silence in the court!"
And the king put on his spectacles and looked anxiously around to make out who was talking. Alice could see, as well as if she were looking over their shoulders, that all the jurors were writing down stupid things on their slates. And she could even make out that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid, and that he had to ask his neighbor to tell him.
A nice muddle their slates will be before the trial's over.
One of the jurors had a pencil that squeaked. This, of course, Alice could not stand. And she went around the court and got behind him, and very soon found an opportunity of taking it away. She did it so quickly that the poor little juror, it was Bill, the lizard, could not make out at all what had become of it. So, after hunting all about for it, he was obliged to write with one finger for the rest of the day. And this was of very little use, as it left no mark on the slate.
Harold, read the accusation.
On this, the White Rabbit blew 3 blasts on his trumpet, and then unrolled the parchment scroll and read as follows.
The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them quite away.
Consider your verdict.
The king said to the jury.
Oh, not yet, not yet. There's a great deal that comes before that.
Call the first witness.
Said the king, and the white rabbit blew 3 blasts on his trumpet and called out,
First witness!
The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other.
I beg your pardon, your majesty, for bringing these in, but I hadn't quite finished my tea when I was sent for.
You ought to have finished. When did you begin?
The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse.
The 14th of March, I think it was.
15th.
16th.
Oh, well, write that down.
The king said to the jury, and the jury eagerly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, and then added them up, and then reduced the answer to shillings and pence.
Take off your hat.
Oh, it isn't mine.
Stolen!
The king exclaimed, turning to the jury, who instantly made him.
No, I keep them to sell.
As an explanation.
I've none of my own. I'm a hatter.
Here the queen put on her spectacles and began staring at the Hatter, who had turned pale and fidgeted.
Give your evidence. Then don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot.
This did not seem to encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one toe to the other, looking uneasily at the queen, and in his confusion he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of the bread and butter. Just at this moment, Alice felt a very curious sensation, which puzzled her a good deal until she made out what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again, and she thought at first she would get up and leave the court, but on second thought, she decided to remain where she was, as long as there was room for her.
I wish you wouldn't squeeze so,
said the Dormouse, who was sitting right next to her.
I can hardly breathe.
I can't help it. I'm growing.
Oh, you've no right to grow here.
Don't talk nonsense. You know you're growing too.
Oh, yes, but I grow at a reasonable pace, not in that ridiculous fashion.
And she got up very sulkily and crossed over to the other side of the court. All this time the queen had never left off staring at the Hatter, and just as the Dormouse crossed the court, she said to one of the officers of the court,
Bring me the list of the singers in the last concert.
On which the wretched Hatter trembled so that he took off both of his shoes.
Give your evidence, or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not.
I'm a poor man, your majesty.
The Hatter began in a trembling voice.
And I hadn't begun my tea, not above a week or so, and what with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea.
The twinkling of the what?
It began with the tea.
Of course twinkling begins with tea. Do you take me for a dunce? Go on.
I'm a poor man, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said...
I didn't.
The March Hare interrupted in a great hurry.
You did!
I deny it.
He denies it. Leave that part out.
Well, at any rate, the Dormouse said...
The Hatter went on, looking anxiously around to see if she would deny it too, but the Dormouse denied nothing, being fast asleep.
And if after that I cut some more bread and butter...
But what did the Dormouse say?
One of the jurymen
That
asked.
I can't remember.
Oh, you must remember. or I'll have you executed.
The miserable hatter dropped his teacup of bread and butter and went down on one knee.
I'm a poor man, Your Majesty.
Oh, you're a very poor speaker.
Here, one of the guinea pigs cheered, immediately suppressed by one of the officers of the court. As that is rather a hard word, I will just explain to you how it was done. They had a large canvas bag, which tied up at the mouth with strings. Into this, they slipped the guinea pig.
I'm glad I've seen that done. I've often read it in the newspapers at the end of trials. There was some attempt at applause which was immediately suppressed by the officers of the court, and I never understood what it meant till now.
Well, if that's all you know about it, you may stand down.
I can't go no lower. I'm on the floor as it is.
Then you may sit down.
Here the other guinea pig cheered and was also suppressed.
Come, that finished the guinea pigs. Now we shall get on better.
I'd rather finish my tea,
said the hatter with an anxious look at the queen, who was reading the list of singers.
You may go.
And the hatter hurriedly left the court without even waiting to put his shoes on.
And just take his head off outside.
The queen added to one of the officers, but the hatter was out of sight before the officer could get to the door.
Call the next witness.
Call the next witness.
Well done.
The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried the pepper box in her hand, and Alice guessed who it was, even before she got into the court. By the way, people near the door began sneezing all at once.
Give your evidence.
Silence!
Oh, good.
He looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice,
Your Majesty must cross-examine this witness.
Well, if I must, I must.
the king said with a melancholy air, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook till his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice,
What are the tarts made of?
Pepper, mostly.
Oh.
Treacle.
said a sleepy voice behind her.
Collar that dormouse. Behead that dormouse. Turn that dormouse out of court. Suppress her. Pinch her. Off with her whiskers.
For some minutes, the whole court was in confusion, getting the dormouse turned out, and by the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared.
Never mind,
said the king with an air of great relief.
Call the next witness?
And he added to an undertone to the queen.
Oh, really, my dear? You must cross-examine the next witness. It quite makes my forehead ache.
Alice watched the White Rabbit as he fumbled over the list, feeling very curious to see what the next witness would be like.
Well, they haven't got much evidence yet,
she said to herself. But imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out at the top of his shrill little voice the name...
Alice!